Okay.
Sure your mics are on.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome back. This is the meeting of the Finance Subcommittee. Today is September 22nd. Mr. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Chairman Elliott,
Here.
Counsel Conway, Counsel Noon.
Here.
3 present.
3 present. Well, after 7 months of communicating via Zoom, I have to say it's a little surreal to be back in the chamber, but I have to say it also feels good to be back in the chamber and to see everybody. So with that, this is a meeting of the Finance Subcommittee called to discuss the FY21 budget for the viewers at home. For the past 3 months, the City Council has adopted a 1/12 budget, sort of in line with the practices of the state government, who have yet to adopt a final budget. But before us tonight will be a presentation by the city manager and the chief financial officer. Also, as well as members of the subcommittee, Council Conway, Council Noon, members of the city council, Council Rourke, Council Mercier, Council Drinkwater, Council Chow are in attendance. We have the city auditor and the business manager for the school departments, as well as a city manager. So with that, Madam Manager, why don't we proceed? The motion was to refer this presentation to this subcommittee. I know there's going to be a lot of questions, which is the purpose of spending more time than we normally would at the city council meeting. So with that, the FY21 budget, I don't know if you have any updates that we want to begin with, Madam Manager, from the state level, legislature, administration of finance. I have heard none. I haven't seen any budget proposal, but word from the governor is that local aid will be level funded, and we're using that figure to build the revenue side of the budget. So with that, nice to see you, Madam Manager, after 7 months, literally, and everybody else. So
thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to the council. There is no update. As a matter of fact, we had a Zoom call this afternoon with the Lieutenant Governor, with representatives from Department of Revenue. This question was posed during the Zoom call. Any updates? The reality is there isn't. There still has not been a budget from the state, nor has it been scheduled for discussion at this point by the legislature. The governor and the legislature committed to level funding, as you mentioned, both local unrestricted aid as well as Chapter 70 money at the FY20 levels. And that is a firm commitment, which the Lieutenant Governor repeated again today. And of course, because it's local aid and Chapter 70 money are not subject to 9C cuts, there's no danger of that being cut later in the year, regardless of what happens as far as those two municipal funds. So we felt once we received those figures and that assurance, probably in late July, we were in a good position to move forward with our budget. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, we have had 1/12 budgets for the first 3 months of the fiscal year. And so the budget before you tonight is for the remaining 3/4 of the year, in commencing on October 1, 2020, and ending June 30th, 2021. The total, just a couple of highlights, the total operating budget is $439,272,583. I just want to speak briefly just to recap what I know the council is aware of, and that is heading into FY21 in the early months of the year in FY20, or the calendar year 20. We had looked at our situation, and we were in a very, very strong position here in the city of Lowell. Our free cash was almost $7.5 million. Our undesignated fund balance was over $10 million. Our stabilization fund was $12.2 million. and we had a very strong credit rating from Standard & Poor's. And so we were excited about facing the next fiscal year. And then, of course, as we all know, COVID hit and the pandemic hit in March. And then since then, life has not been the same for anybody, and it's been a difficult time for all. And so, though we had crafted a budget, as we always do, starting in January, bringing in department heads and getting their wish lists and preparing a budget to present to this council, typically in May and June, that budget obviously was irrelevant once the numbers went south. So far, we're still expecting a $6 to $7 billion shortfall on the state side of their revenues. As the Lieutenant Governor said this afternoon, we are all looking to Washington and waiting for something from Congress as far as a stimulus package that can assist states and cities and towns. But to date, we have not seen anything on that horizon. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn I know the CFO, Connor Baldwin, and Allison Chambers have a presentation for the council, and so I will turn it over. I do want to thank the finance team for doing a tremendous amount of work, and I'll say a few words about that later on, but I do want to thank them up front because this has not been an easy year for anyone, and certainly not in the world of finance. So, Mr. Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Through you, Mr. Chair. As the manager pointed out, this is a year unlike any other, and in my 7 years as the CFO for the city, this is a budget like we haven't seen, certainly in my time or in any time that I can remember. And I'll try to be brief with the presentation here, but I think it's worthwhile walking through some of the fiscal challenges, the major challenges, and some of the salient points in the budget. So just to review some of the challenges, they're not unlike many we've seen in the past. They're only exacerbated by the coronavirus and its impact on our finances. So this year we had almost a $1.5 million increase in our pension assessment, as well as additional increases, fixed costs in our cherry sheet charges. The most notable of which, and this is the same as has been the case for several years running, is in the charter school assessment. And there will be more discussion about that as we progress. Another major challenge in the budget has been the cost for solid waste and recycling collection and disposal. And most notably, there was almost a $750,000 increase in costs, most notably associated with contaminated recycling. And that is a product of the most recent contract with Waste Management. We had other fixed cost increases such as health insurance, utilities, et cetera. But the goal throughout the budget, the city manager's priority was to avoid layoffs at all costs. And we, I'm happy to report that we've been able to do that in the budget, but we're not out of the woods yet. And this budget is going to be one that the finance department and the city manager's office is going to need to monitor closely as we move forward on a daily basis. So one other thing I want to mention is that while the legislature did level fund the major local aid accounts, that did put the city behind a little bit because there was a scheduled increase in certainly Chapter 70, and we've discussed that in the council chambers before, the money from the Student Opportunity Act, but also in the unrestricted aid that the city uses to fund all other areas of government. There was a $725 approximately $1,000 increase that would have been in the governor's budget that was proposed in January. A level funding proposal took that away, so we're using the 2020 number. Also worth note is that in the 2021 budget, the city has defunded a number of vacant positions. So the total approximately dollar value amount for those vacant positions is $564,000. Those were some of the necessary actions that needed to happen in order to bring the budget into balance. So moving on to the next slide, and Allison helping remotely to bring us through the presentation, is just a highlight of what I mentioned, the charter school impact. And when we discuss the impact of the charter school impact, it's the difference between the assessment and then the reimbursement that we receive from the state. If you go back to FY 2008, the difference between those was just about $8 million. Fast forward to today and in the 21 budget, that number has grown to a cost that has to be absorbed by the city budget of over $26 million. Every year we see approximately a $2 to $3 million net increase in the assessment, and that follows along as the charter school expands its grade offerings, the school on Middlesex Street. And then the chart on the next slide just lays out those numbers for the council to consider, as it is one of our major challenges. To the next slide, some of the financial impacts that we've had to consider in our revision to the 2021 budget. We had a balanced budget back before March. We had to really take a close look at our revenue assumptions, specifically those related to the economy. We've talked about the aid, but also meals tax receipts, hotel motel tax receipts, motor vehicle excise receipts. Those all had to be revised, and a number of other local receipts to be more realistic considering our revenue collections. And then on the other side of the ledger in expenses, we've talked about the city manager's controls that have been put in place essentially since the fourth quarter of the last year. The hiring freeze, the tightened purchase order restrictions, budget reduction program, and the use of any federal money that has been available through the CARES Act. Moving forward to some of the highlights and initiatives, I think that the one here that is most notable is the continued investment in the city. And the council did approve back in June a $6.7 million loan order. And just to address that, we can't really take the foot off the gas as it comes to capital investments, because that will cost the city in the long run as it relates to maintenance, as it relates to other costs within the operating budget. We have to continue to invest in our roads, in our buildings, et cetera, and that's why that loan order was so important. So now to talk a little bit about the schools. As of our most recent certification by DESE and the net school spending requirement, the city was $4.9 million above that required level. Now that is a combination of Chapter 70, the local cash contribution, and then the maintenance of effort, which we affectionately refer to it as, which is essentially an overhead for costs incurred in the city budget in support of the schools. There's an agreement in place, there's an accounting that happens every year, it's certified by DESE as well as by Powers & Sullivan, our outside auditors, to get us to that number that is submitted to DESE. And we do anticipate with the amount included in the 2021 budget that the city will continue to meet the net school spending requirement. The next chart is a pie chart that details the city's revenues. We've talked about this before, but the city's revenue sources, only 1/3 of the annual budget is funded by taxes. That is the opposite of many communities throughout Massachusetts, where we're 1/3 taxes, approximately more than half, almost 2/3 intergovernmental revenue. That is the flip in most communities, where 2/3 or greater is funded by the tax levy. In Lowell, we look to state and federal funding sources to make up a large component of our revenue for the year, and that makes us subject to shocks that may happen in those revenue sources if there's cuts at the state level, cuts at the federal level, et cetera. But also included on this chart is that bottom line number of $439 million that makes up the 2021 operating budget. And then just finally on taxes, the proposed 2021 tax levy is $143 million. We have a projected estimate for new growth of 2.1 million. We think that is somewhat aggressive but reasonable estimate. In the last few years, and we've talked about this in prior budgets, we have often exceeded our new growth estimate. And then just finally, the average impact, the estimated average impact to the single-family home from the 2021 budget is about $36.47 per quarter. The final slide here just details the appropriations by category. It's another pie chart and shows the education is the largest single component of the expenditures, with public safety, public works, et cetera, coming after that. So that's the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the subcommittee may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baldwin. We'll go to questions. We'll start with Mr. Conway. Councilor Conway.
How much additional monies are they getting?
So the assessment is at about $28 million for the year, and that comes off procedurally. Essentially, our aid is given to the state, and that amount is deducted from the aid. And then there's about a $3 million reimbursement pursuant to the state law for the reimbursement formula.
Okay, can you explain to the public a bit that the difference as far as the proportion of monies? Do the Lowell Public Schools get the same additional monies proportionally as the charter schools? Because we've often talked about the charter schools have cost a tremendous amount of money, extra money, and we end up picking up the load on that. So, could you address that a bit?
So each year, and the amount of the increase in the assessment year over year, that is an amount that is creditable towards the net school spending requirement. It is a significant budgetary challenge in relation to stack them up side by side, if that's what you're asking. The amount of cash support to the schools from the city is about $16 million, some approximate value. The amount of the maintenance of effort, which is costs incurred on the city budget in support of the schools, is about $46 million approximately. So those are costs that are incurred on the city side for various expenses, for pension, for non-MTRS employees, for health insurance for retired teachers, overhead, et cetera. That is what makes up that portion.
Okay. I think that we've discussed this numerous times on the floor about is it the changing of the equation of monies? Am I getting that correct? In other words, how the money is proportioned out, the percentage-wise, whether we were trying to change that at all?
There has been discussion over the years about the makeup of the maintenance of effort agreement. Is that what you're referring to?
I believe so, yeah.
And that has been, the same agreement has been in place since, I think, 2007, that lays out all of those costs that are attributable to the school incurred by the city.
Okay. And one other quick question. Have we got the school budget yet, our school budget?
No, Counselor.
FY '21?
No.
When do we get that?
I believe Ms. Turner is here. We've requested a copy of the full budget. I have yet to see one.
I mean, it's difficult to...
We have, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Baldwin.
Over the months, the city manager has, as is normal procedure in the year, communicated the funding amount to the superintendent, the preliminary amount when we had the governor's budget, as well as a revised amount once the state revised their estimates for local aid. And then we have been in close contact with the finance office in the schools regarding the number. Each month, we have passed a 1/12 budget.
Okay, so in other words, the school department and the city have met, because we did talk about that on the council floor. They have, you guys have met on a regular basis, is that correct?
That number has been communicated via email.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. That's all for right now.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman.
I just had a quick,
City Manager.
just in follow-up to Councilor Conway on the question of discussions around charter schools, and I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but there have been conversations for many years at the legislative level, at the municipalities level, as the funding source and formula. It's taking money away from the public schools, and I think that's one of the biggest complaints we have, that it's, as we support the charter schools, we're draining, funds from the local public schools, and also charging the local municipalities for contributions. And this is another area where the Student Opportunity Act had the state been able to hold to what the promise was. Not only would the school department have received an increase of nearly $13 million in this year's budget because of the Student Opportunity Act, but we stood to see an increase in the charter school reimbursement. And Mr. Baldwin, was it an additional $3 million that we
It would have brought us up over $6 million in the
Right.
reimbursement.
So I think that was an effort by the legislature to try and start leveling the playing field and giving more money back to municipalities, and not, as far as the charter school. And again, with COVID, that disappeared. So not only did the $750,000 disappear, but the additional $3 million disappeared with COVID too.
Thank you for articulating that. I was trying to ask that question in an awkward way, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I just want to follow up, and just to put into perspective this charter school, and we understand it's education, it's public education. The city of Lowell is going to cost us $30 million for charter school. The state's reimbursing us $3.9 million.
Correct.
That is unconscionable, and I know that this council, and myself and other members have filed motions, and that's fine. If it's public education, just fund it. That's, to me, that's 10%. So the city, by way of the impact that it has, the city is funding $26.1 million. That's coming right out of the levy, and we have no say in it. So I know that we have sent down resolutions, we have sent down home rule petitions. I know other gateway cities are no different. I do think it's a significant issue. Clearly, it's having a tremendous budget impact on us when we're trying to keep taxes low. We're holding our line on health care and doing our best with pension. And we look at our budget, there's no increases. We've taken well over $500,000 in positions that we're not funding. So I think it's the magnitude of the impact is significant. Last year, so anyway, last year it went from 26.5 million to 30 million this year, and that has to come right off the levy, and it's really frustrating, and I don't know what can be done about it. We can sit here and complain about it, but the legislature has got to act. And I understand it was a small move, but even additional, I think in February, I have February's presentation, by the way, pretty interesting. It was pre-COVID, and I got to give you credit. I got to give you credit, Mr. Chief Finance Officer. A lot of predictions came through. So we'll move on to the next subject matter, but I guess I just had to vent some frustration on the impact that it's having to the city of Lowell, where we hold positions. We'd love to be able to hire, to add more public safety or, so many other areas even, or additional funding to the schools, because as you mentioned, Madam Manager, it's public education, and it should be funded accordingly. So, Councilor Noon, and then Councilor Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chairman. Conway, you spoke of, and the chairperson also echoes the local aid that we're supposed to get prior to COVID. We lost $750,000. So with the plans the state and the governor plans to do a level of funding on both Chapter 70 as well as the unrestricted aid. How much impact is that? I know there's going to be a big impact on the school with Chapter 70. There's nothing much this council can do about it. But so how much impact on the unrestricted aid that come to the city with the level of funding?
So with the excuse me, with the FY 2020 amount, it's a $725,000 loss of revenue that would have gone to all other areas of government in FY 2021.
That would be the loss to the city at this point because the level funding.
Right, with that level funding revenue from the state.
Madam Mayor.
Madam Manager?
And I just, if I understand, so if with level funding, our fixed cost rose over $5 million.
That's right.
$5 million.
So,
$5 million increase
Yeah.
in charter school costs from last year to this year,
But-
with no increase in reimbursement from the state.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, there's something need to be done about it. I know that you brought this up many times before, and you also said that gateway cities like Lowell are impacted by this and compounded by the COVID-19. There's got to be something we can do about it. You can't be rose from 5 years ago from 8 million now to 30 million. The taxpayers, have to eat this up, and it's not fair.
Yeah,
So-
I think you bring a good motion, and I don't know what the solution is, but even from a perspective that, what can we do moving forward? I know that there is one of the charter schools, they continue to add a grade. There's a monumental increase. Is there some way, and maybe we can ask the law department to, to impose a moratorium or, it's, the taxpayers are paying for it until we get more reimbursement from the state on this. I'd be willing at least to look into having a law department. I don't know if there was a vote or, I don't know. I think I'm searching for something here that we can send a message that, look, we understand charter schools, we understand, there's 2 in the city and we fund it, but moving forward, can't afford any more, and until we get more funding, then I think that we should limit the number with the expansion. So, Madam Manager, any?
We could get an opinion, Mr. Chairman. I believe the additional seats have already been authorized at certain intervals. It's the state that's authorizing these charter schools, and it depends on a number of factors, including test scores and things like that. But we could certainly get an opinion on that. It is a big challenge, there's no doubt about it, and it's not going to get better
Right.
as we move over the next
Right.
few years.
Any objection from the members of the subcommittee? Councilor Noonan,
I
I'm
have
sorry,
no
you had the
objection
floor.
on that, Mr. Chairman. I just also want to join you and Councilor Conway in commending the CFO and the managers for really stay put on the level funding as well as the hiring freeze in these matters, and because we have a long way to go. There's no certainty the future will be whole on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No objection if we can get an opinion. I think it'd be a good learning opportunity for me as well as a member of the council, exactly the formula, what drives the extension. So entertain a motion to request the law department provide an opinion on charter school funding reimbursement and any options that we may have available to limit expansion. Motion by Council Conway, seconded by Council Noon. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Council Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the major fiscal challenges that I think was the first slide that we saw, Mr. Baldwin, all of those challenges you only think are going to continue to rise over the next couple of years. Does that make sense?
I would absolutely agree with that, and I think as it relates to our local receipts and revenue, it's something we're going to need to keep a very close eye on as we go quarter to quarter, if not month to month, throughout the budget.
Right. So there was there it is, still $725,000, I guess you would call it penalties for recycling. I know we had a discussion a few meetings ago. Has there been talk about that, maybe, Madam Manager, of maybe what we can do to, cut that number? And I'm sure that number has been lower in the past and has continued to rise over the years. And, next year at the rate that we're at, it could be at $1 billion, correct?
It's through you, Mr. Chairman, it is unsustainable at the rate we're going completely. That we have had presentations, and there's one on tonight for an update on the audit. You can see that despite best efforts, it is not working. We still have a high rate of contamination. And in prior years, years ago, we didn't have to pay for that because the trash hauler was able to sell the recyclables, but now there's no market, and now we have to pay under the current contract for anything over and above what's cited in the contract. So I have great concern about the cost as it is. Our recycling is upside down. You know, we bring in, it costs $6 million and $6.5 million or so a year, and our trash fee is bringing in about $3,200,000, and the rest of it is being funded by the taxpayers. So, and as that contamination fee goes up, that subsidy is just increasing, and it's not.
Right, and that's why I've been reading that the contamination fee has also skyrocketed recently. Before, when it was zero, like you said, that's only going to continue to rise.
Right.
So, you know, if you're looking for a motion from the council, or just to bring something in to see what, you know, we can do, because, you know, if our budget now is 1.5 million short, and you have to go and request certain things from our employees and our unions, this is half that money right here, right? So the fault of some is the penalty of all. That would make sense, right? So, you know, whether you want to, you know, maybe a 3-month plan of just doing a couple of different items in recycling, or if you want to just get rid of it altogether for a certain period of time, you know, this is going to be well over $1 million within the next 18 months. Thank you.
You're welcome. Council Conway, and before we move, I'd like to, why don't we go to I'll go to Council Mercia, and then I'd like to get the school, let's talk about the school budget, unless other councilors. So, Council Conway?
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with Council O'Rourke on that. You know, I think we talked about this before, and I mentioned on the floor that a number of months ago, I was up, actually it was probably a year or two ago, up in New York, and they limited it. So I think it would cut down on the contamination. And I just came back from New York, and the recycling, they have 2 recycling bins, paper, cardboard. That's it in one. The other one, bottles and plastic and cans. That's it. So in other words, I would think it would, they're still getting to the point where they can recycle, but I think they're probably cutting down on their contamination costs on it. So it might be something, again, that we look at, just limit it and get it right, whatever we do, instead of trying to get everything on the table and we're not getting it right for obvious reasons. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Mercia.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Connor Baldwin, and might I add that everything here is put together so well. I'm very impressed with all the hard work that went into this. I just have a very simple question. What is the residential tax rate per thousand? Did it go up, or like, what was it last year? What is it going to be now?
Sure. So last year it was $14.12, I believe, per 1,000.
Yeah.
It's difficult at this point to predict, because that is something that happens when we set the tax rate, normally, which would be further out from where we are now, but typically in the November-December period. Once the assessor has the growth for the year certified and all of the values for the homes certified, the increase that we've projected is the increase in the levy. So we do project that for the average single-family home, it's about $36 per quarter, or approximately $140 per year would be the increase to the average single-family home. However, I will just disclaim that that is an estimate. We will certainly inform the council when the tax rate is set, and we'll have a more fine-tuned number at that time.
Okay, and another off-the-wall crazy question, but we know that we had the creation of a homeless coordinator. I understand that, but then it said, and we implemented the coordinated outreach and engagement team, so it's the COET. I thought it was a co-op. Is that the same thing? Or we didn't initiate something else, did we? On page, oh, I'm sorry. It's not numbered. There's your first mistake. It should have been numbered. But
I see what you're referring to, Counselor, and that was an attempt to show some of the highlights in the budget.
Yes.
Despite these difficult financial times, there are still strategies in some of the departments and initiatives that are making progress, and this is one of the things that the health department listed in their budget, and perhaps later this evening it would be a question best posed to the health department.
But it's both. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's not a new program.
There's not a new program.
Oh, so it must be the co-op. They just
Yeah,
named it that.
Unless the homeless coordinator is coordinating with others as well, including working with the co-op team.
Yes.
But we haven't created a new
Oh, all right. That's
team.
fine. Thank you.
Okay, I'll say Councilor. Councilor Chow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this meeting. It's very important during these difficult times. I know a lot of residents at home watching this, they have a high anxiety as what's going to happen. And I want to echo all the councilors' compliments to the city manager's office and Connor Baldwin for the detailed written report and the presentation tonight. I know with the gloomy economic situation coming with the cold weather, it's difficult to balance the budget, and the city is facing some crisis, but at the same time, I compliment the city manager's office for continuing to put investment in the city. As Mr. Baldwin said, we're not going to put a step on the brake. Things must move on, trying to avoid layoffs and furloughs and so forth. Just you touch on briefly on the increase in the levy, and I think on a single family, the average increase is about $36 per quarter. That runs to about $144 per year. And that number seems, I think, doable for many working families. If they're double income, they're young enough. It's a stretch, there's no question about that, because let's add on to other costs in the family household. But my question is for people, for residents with fixed income. They, $144 and the increase in the levy tax, but also you have the increase in the water and the sewer. All those things add up. The prescription might go up as well. You don't know what other costs they might have to incur. The food might cost because of the situation. For people on fixed income like that, there's really no way for them to come up with the extra $144 minimum to cover this. What are the available programs in the city, if there are any, to help these people on fixed income that just they can't no way come up with the extra money? Thank you.
Question to you, Mr. Baldwin.
Sorry, question to CFO, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. For those individuals who may be experiencing hardships, I think that a reasonable thing to discuss and consider is to see if they're eligible for any abatements, statutory abatements that would apply to their particular circumstance. And I would encourage anybody who's in a situation like that to reach out to the assessor's office, and maybe they are eligible for an abatement and they just don't know it. There are certain statutory categories, whether it's an elderly exemption or a widower or a widow exemption, certainly for veterans. Those are all written into the law for folks to, on an annual basis, get a break on their taxes. And if anyone thinks they may be eligible, I would encourage them to reach out to Sulame in the assessor's office to find out more details about that.
Okay. And just to follow up on water sewer, because I think you bring up some good points, Counselor, about folks at home, and they're worrying about their their banking account and how they're going to pay their taxes and their mortgage. And water sewer for our seniors, that's a block rate structure, so there is a discount. There is a set discount, and that will not be affected in this next rate increase. The seniors will stay the same. So just want to give them a little bit of comfort. And I know that we did. I know when Sulame, the assessor, comes, I'm going to ask her, because I believe we increased the exemption limit to the maximum. That's governed by the state, by the way. And I think if we had an opportunity to increase that to help the seniors in our community, I know that we would. But I just wanted to throw that information out there. So why don't we go? I did ask the time is moving on, and so if there's no other Councilor Drinkwater questions, I'm sorry.
If you want to move on to
No,
another
no, go
presentation,
ahead.
that's fine. I know we'll have an opportunity to ask questions during the regular meeting.
That's fine. Why don't you have the floor, Counsel?
I did just want to ask, I'll try to keep it brief and kind of piggybacking on other questions. I do think, once again, I want to praise, city manager and the financial team on putting this budget together. I know it's a balancing act. We've talked a little bit about, the increase in taxes. We know that's difficult, trying to prevent layoffs, which is certainly extremely important. I wanted to maybe just see if it was possible for Mr. Baldwin to touch on, I know there's also the use of reserves in this budget from the stabilization fund. It may be just to see how we're trying to balance between taxes, use of stabilization, and to make sure we're preventing any pain from city employees.
Mr. Baldwin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to address what is a very good point, there is a use of reserves in the budget estimate, about $3.5 million, which that is our strategy to try to limit the impact on taxes, and it brings us to a legally balanced budget. It is a number larger than what we've seen in the past, and most of that is due to what we've talked about here and before. But our strategy has always been that despite that being part of the budget plan when it is approved, we try to set the tax rate, which happens later in the year, at a number less than that from reserves, and we're able to accomplish this in a number of ways, one being how the new growth comes in throughout the year, how our expenditures are tracking through the first 2 quarters of the year, as well as how our local receipts are being collected through the first 2 quarters of the fiscal year. And by the time we get to set the tax rate, when we have to finalize everything with the Department of Revenue, we will look to try to come in with a number less than that amount from reserves. But it is a concern, and we part of the earlier discussion was that we were coming from a place of great fiscal strength, and we had built up reserves over the years to a level higher than what we've seen in a long time, and we hate to go backwards from that by using reserves for the budget, but if we absolutely must, we will look to replenish that amount from reserves from free cash later in the year, depending on that size. That will be our strategy, Councilor.
Thank you. All set, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Counsel. If there's no other questions or objections, I'd like to have the finance director, business manager from the school department come up. Council Conway kicked off the discussion about the budget. We haven't seen one. We know that there was one adopted, I think, back in May. I'm not sure that the time frame, but sort of pre-COVID. It's funny, the meeting that we had a joint meeting way back when, and then we had a subsequent finance subcommittee. That $12.7 million increase was in fact in there, which was not capriciously, but that was taken off the table. So can you just give us an update where the school department is, the budget? We haven't seen a budget. We have a figure, placeholder in this budget, but why don't I just turn the floor over to you and walk us through the finance of the school department side.
So we had the budget with the $12.7 million Student Opportunity Act increase. That was the last presented in the springtime. However, we've done multiple scenarios that we've shared with the school committee. We've done a 75% of the Student Opportunity Act, 50%, then 25%, then level funded. So we were well prepared when the news came in that we were going to be level funded, which would have brought us down $12.7 million. But we ended up getting $3.9 million more than level funding in the state's released figures recently. And we also got $4.7 million in ESSER funds, which were unrestricted. So between the two, we were able to cover the $5.4 million that we needed for contractual raises, the health insurance increases, the additional funds that the additional budget that we allowed each of the schools to get, and the COVID costs that we have.
Okay, will we be getting that budget soon?
We have a prepared budget. I can email him. I didn't realize he wanted the draft. We have a budget that's being presented next week.
Okay.
So we're working after you this time, being that, due to the timing.
Okay, that's fine. So even in its draft form, I mean, you've published, there's a publication that there's a hearing is coming, so that budget that you have to provide to anyone that wants to look at it, can we please get a copy of that?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Can you just walk through just one more time for me? I'm not, the 3.9 level funded additional funds, did you say Chapter 70
Yes.
funds? Additional 70? Oh, okay. Did that come in the Cherry? What was the communication? Because, of course, I'm thinking, okay, if Chapter 70 got 3.9, was there any other unrestricted local aid that may have come in?
I think at the time, they had indicated a inflation rate would apply for Chapter 70, but they didn't determine what it was, and now they've determined an inflation
Good news.
rate.
And the second 4.7 million, I know you used the acronym, could you?
That's from the CARES Act. It's the ESSER funds, ESSER.
Okay.
And we also received other grants.
And that's unrestricted, and that could just be used for your general operating budget?
That's exactly what we did.
Okay.
We didn't add anything with those funds. We offset our health insurance. We got the state to approve, keeping it simple rather than going through the entire budget, saying this will be funded by the grant, this will be funded by the grant. We just kept it in the health insurance line.
Okay.
So as I was going to say, as far as the other COVID grants, those are restricted, but they do help all the additional costs that we're facing right now with COVID costs. I mean, we're having to hire new teachers to, deal with the remote versus the in-person, all the sanitation, the PPE, the plexiglass, but the grants are covering those.
And do you have that figure on, I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but short of having, the document. So how much are you receiving
So we got
other CARES Act?
3.2 million. 3.2 million is for the school reopening grant, which is specifically for costs such as PP&E and other costs that we would need just for COVID. So you can't cover anything in your budget that would have been in the budget prior to COVID.
Okay.
And then the next one is a COVID tech grant. That was a competitive grant that we received $1.7 million, which will help us with all of the remote technology costs that we're facing. Again, so these
Are those
two.
federal, they state, combination of their?
Federal.
Federal, okay.
I believe. And then the general fund is, we've put $2.3 million in general fund to cover the COVID cost.
Okay. The 2.3, that's a source of revenue, or is that?
It's from our general fund, which comes from Chapter 70. So from Chapter 70 and city cash, that's.
By
where-
allocating specifically for that purpose? Okay, okay. I know I cut you short, so if you want to continue, is there?
No, I was actually just giving you an update on here's the revenue. We did.
Right.
Despite the dire circumstances that we're facing, we did have funding come in that's helping offset the cost that we would have faced. As the city manager was explaining, even when we have a level funded budget, there are additional costs for salary increases, step increases, not raises.
Right.
And for the health insurance, the COVID costs, the additional funds that the schools need to be compliant with ELL and such costs like that. So once we lost the Student Opportunity Act, all of these incoming grants helped save the day, so to speak.
No, that's good news. So you got 5.5, 5.4 in contractual. Okay. I'm good so far at this point. Members of the subcommittee, questions? Council Noon? Council Conway?
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
I didn't catch it, the COVID-19 tax federal grant. How much is that again, please?
So we have a school reopening grant. That's one of the COVID grants. That's $3.2 million.
Yes.
Then we've received a COVID tech grant, which is a competitive grant that was $1.7 million.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Council Conway?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. How are things set for the busing?
Busing would be, I mean, it's really difficult because there aren't even enough buses, even if we could afford the additional buses. So in order to do the social distancing, only a fraction of the kids can receive busing. So we changed the rules. Only, not just anyone could get it. Only the kids that have legal requirements to get it, and if there was space left, there was a lottery after.
Is the goal to increase the number of students going into school on a daily basis? Is that the goal, right, at this point?
That would be the hopeful, that would be
Right.
hopeful, but
Well,
we're
with
25.
that in mind, where are the buses on that situation?
The buses,
Do we have them ready to go? Is that,
we don't have enough buses to cover the 25% of the students that would be in person. We don't have enough, we can't. So we were encouraging the families to, some of them could drive their students. They rescheduled some students where they can walk to school. But no, we don't have enough we don't have enough.
so assume fast forward another 25% of the students going to attend school in person. What happens? They all have to walk now?
We would have a problem. And not only because of just the funding, but because of the fact that we don't have enough buses. There's not enough buses to accommodate. If you're only putting a fraction of the students on a bus, there's not enough buses to, you know.
If I can just, so the issue with the bus is that normally, within the contract, X amount of students are on a particular bus and can be transported on a particular route. Now, as a result of COVID-19, that number is either cut in half or 75%, so the normal route can only pick up 25% of the students it normally would, so literally, there's not enough buses.
Exactly.
But are the buses the same number of buses that you had last year? It's just that you cannot use, you don't have enough because you're limited with the number of students. Is that what you're saying? But the number is still the same of buses that are available.
We didn't cut our transportation
That's
budget.
right.
We didn't cut the transportation budget, we just have less seats available, yes.
Okay, that's it. Seats, okay, thank you.
So at some point when, or should, is busing taking place now?
Yes, I
There is
believe so.
transportation?
Yes, unless something happened, we were prepared for buses, yes.
Okay, when is that going to resume, or did I just not see buses in the city?
I didn't hear anything that, and I don't handle buses, but I didn't hear anything where they weren't working for those students that, I think that we provided buses from day one for all those students that are legally required to have busing. Like special ed busing, we're still required for, to transport special ed students with IEPs.
Okay. What is the placeholder for transportation in the school department budget? Do you know that?
It's approximately 11 million between the special ed and the regular ed transportation.
Okay, so students are not being bused as we speak, other than special ed and those with IED that require busing. What about those costs that, is the city going to absorb those costs even though we're not transporting children?
So there was a lot of controversy about that last year. We actually had savings because we did not pay. We refused to pay for services that were not, we didn't have the service, so we didn't pay for it. So there was a surplus in our budget. This year, they negotiated like other communities have. Many communities have negotiated because they have to continue to pay their bus drivers. They have to continue to pay the insurance and all the cost to run a transportation business. So the negotiated rate, if we don't go to school, if we go full remote, would still be to pay the bus company 40%. So we would then see another savings from transportation.
Okay, so I think I have a lot more questions, and I know we're putting you on the spot with a lot of numbers, and you're pulling them up pretty good. So I'd like to make a motion that the City Finance Subcommittee meet with the School Finance Subcommittee and members of both finance teams to have a further discussion once we receive the school budget. There's no objection from members of the subcommittee. Moved by Councilor Noon, seconded by Councilor Conway. Roll call. Yes.
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 3 years will bring that motion forward to the full city council.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Councilman-
may, just
Councilman?
one question back to Connor, if I may. Connor, I know that the city has submitted a request to the federal government for assistance. So is there any word from them yet as far as, federal assistance?
Yeah, I think to the extent,
Yep.
if I may, Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Mr. Baldwin, and then,
to the extent that the Federal CARES Act money is available to the city, we have been accounting for those eligible costs separately and will be making grant requests against the city's allotment. I think that just from an advocacy standpoint, if more money can be made available at the federal level, it is certainly needed by Lowell and other municipalities. So it's something that because these cost pressures are going to continue, and I think it's only going to be with federal assistance that we're able to make it through, similar to the ERA situation.
Mr. Chairman, if I can
Madam
just
Manager?
add, the CARES Act, as Mr. Baldwin points out, is for expenses that were not budgeted, and it's the same as for the school department, so other things that were unforeseen. But it doesn't replace lost revenue or the hole in the budget, so to speak. And that's something that all communities and states, for that matter, have been looking to Congress for. There's been 3 rounds of stimulus money, and in May, the House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act, and that contained funding, stimulus money for states, for cities, for towns. It would have provided, and it was just the House version, but that has gone nowhere. And so I think everybody is looking for the federal government to come in with their 4th stimulus package. And the Senate has proposed one most recently, but it contained nothing for states, cities, or towns. So
Could you please give us update on that? We'll keep
We'll keep
update
you
on that.
posted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thank you, Councilor. Anything else from member of the subcommittee? Thank you. I think this was good. I think we covered a lot of ground. If you could, thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing that information. If you can forward us that budget, I think that'll be very helpful. For our next meeting, I would like to meet next Tuesday. There is no city council meeting. I don't know. When is the hearing for the school department budget?
I actually think it is Tuesday.
Oh, it is
Is
Tuesday?
that the 29th?
Okay.
Yes. So we're presenting on the 29th.
What time is that
I
meeting?
believe it's at 6 o'clock.
Is it in here?
Yes.
Okay, well, perhaps we can arrange to meet prior to that. It would seem to make more sense rather than to meet after, but if it's after, that's fine too. But thank you for coming and sharing some information. I appreciate it on such short notice. We'll bring 2 motions forward to the City Council. I'm sure there'll be more discussion on this budget. Madam Manager, Mr. Baldwin, like my colleagues have mentioned, once again, I believe the information presented exceeds expectations as it did last year. For anyone that has questions about this budget, I believe all of your questions can be answered in this. I believe it's a lengthy document, but it's, I'd say, chock full of information, good information about the city finances, our investment policies. There's department detail, and it's very well put together. And I appreciate it from someone that read most of it and will perhaps read the rest of it, because I think it's knowing the mechanics of the city and all comes down to this document. With that, entertain a motion to recess until our next meeting. So any other questions, we'll bring this forward. I'm sure there'll be other questions at the hearing tonight, but I'm prepared. I think a lot of questions. Councilor Drinkwater brought up a point. We'll elaborate a little bit later. We're using some of the rainy day fund. In my opinion, it's raining. And this is why during good fiscal times, we do put money in our stabilization fund, because we can have an incredible spike in taxes. And I know there's a commitment to look at things like overlay funds And while I'd like to see and be hopeful monies coming from the federal stimulus package, I really have, I don't have great expectations that we're going to get a nickel. So moving forward, this is why we're holding the line. But it is raining. As much as I don't like to use our stabilization fund for a number of reasons, it's a rainy day fund, and we need to stabilize finances here in the city without putting it, as they say, in the backs of the taxpayers, because there's enough anxiety. People are concerned about so many other things, and we have to use some of our reserves to keep city operations moving forward in a good manner. So with that, motion was made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. We'll recess to a later time. Before I do, I have the city auditor here. Can you come up? Any last, when we talk about reserves fiscally, how we doing, how the books, can you do it in 30 seconds?
Thank you, I can. It's actually looking very well considering the circumstances. The great, job by Connor Bodwell and his team.
Right. Well, I want to say, I want to recognize you, and I will ask you at the city council meeting, because I did ask you to attend. I do have some questions, but, part of the fiscal team is the auditor to make sure everything is being spent appropriately and in accordance with all of our procurement laws. And from the last report we got, we're in good shape. So stay tuned for the next meeting.
Thank you.
All those in favor signify by saying aye, and those opposed, this meeting stands in recess. Thank you.
Did you get a book? Did you get, oh, all right. Oh, yeah. I don't,